Our worthy forefathers, let's give them a cheer. To climates unknown did courageously steer. Through oceans to deserts for freedom they came, and dying bequeathed us their freedom and fame. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we'll live. Our purses are ready, steady, friends, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men, our money will give.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first spring semester conversation for the Historical Society of Old Abington. And we have a cable audience as well, but you're here in person and we greatly appreciate that. We run a series of conversations. We used to run programs. We would hire a speaker to come in and talk for 40 minutes about something or other. And it was kind of limiting, you know. I think the first time I realized it wasn't going to work is we were doing a program about Eagle Scouts. And I wasn't going to get an Eagle Scout to come in and stand up here for 40 minutes and talk about being an Eagle Scout. So I decided instead to interview Eagle Scouts. And it became the format we have followed since, is to have conversations instead of having programs. And it's worked out well for us and brought us some fascinating programs. So I'm glad you're here today to hear and potentially participate in this one. It is participatory. If you have something you want to ask or say and think it's appropriate, raise your hand and we'll get to you by all means. So anyway, I'm Doug Ulwick. I'm the president of the Historical Society of Old Abington, and we'll start this program the way we start all of our programs, with a salute to the flag. So those who are willing, able, and interested, please stand and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. So we run 3 conversations in the fall, October, November, December. And we used to just kind of skip January and jump in at February until one bad winter, and we ended up canceling most of February and finally said, do March, April, May. So this is the March program, the first of the spring semester. The second is also on Rockland. We've taken this conversation and broken it into 2 parts and invited 2 guest speakers. And this one is on the actual breaking away from the old town of Abington to form a new town. And the second one coming up in April will be establishing a new town. Okay, we're a new town, what do we do? How do we do it? And there's some carryover between the 2, as you'd expect. They had some infrastructure in place, but there's also a lot of things they had to do to establish a new town and how they did it successfully, and they, as we know, did it successfully. How many here live in Rockland? Show of hands. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. We greatly appreciate it. And I hope you're all going to go to Town Hall for cake on Thursday. I will mention that a little later in the program. They're doing something with that. And we have so that's going to take us March, April. The May program, we recently revived our essay or our writing contest that we did for years. And have had some entries to that. The deadline was February 28th, I think. Should have been the 29th. Marilyn, did you want to say something about it? I have Marilyn Weber here. Yeah, come on up. It's fine. We have a trio of 3 who have reintroduced the program and run it for us. And okay.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to see such a great turnout today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But yes, I'm part of the trio, as Doug said, who kind of revitalized the essay contest through the Historical Society of Old Abington. And we added a piece of it this year that is, one part is adult, which it's always been. We've also added a part that's for students. And the deadline for all of these essays was on February 28th, 9th this year. And we did get 2 submissions. So my fellow trio members, Eileen Walls, who's sitting in the back, and Deb Damon, I don't know that Deb is here today, we will be reading the essays, and we will be getting back with the winner of the essay. If it's, I believe they're both adult entries. We'll get back to you on who the winner is, and that person will be speaking at the May conversation. So that will be interesting. Yeah, so with excited about it.
We may move the location of that to the Abington Senior Center. I just knowing who entered. One of the people is a wonderful member of the society, but she can't get in the building anymore. So the senior center would be accessible. So I think we're going to investigate.
Yes, we will.
I think no matter what, we'll talk with the committee about it, but we might present both papers, you know, and get the wisdom of both submissions. And just knowing that in mind, we'll keep you posted.
And it should be, these papers should add to the collection at Dwyer and provide some really nice insights into the history of Old Abington.
Perfect. Thank you, Marilyn.
You're welcome.
Marilyn Zagarella-Weber is not just a member of the Historical Society, she's a retired Abington School principal and reading teacher, and is also now on the Dwyer Board of Trustees. So she wears a lot of hats, and we're grateful for her work. And her husband, who's with her, is from Rockland. So there. I think I hit all the high points there, Marilyn. So anyway, Van Heffernan, thank you for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
He's an amazing researcher, and he lives in an area that's very germane to what we're talking about today. And I thought he'd be ideal for this. I just love his research. He often posts his work on the Facebook pages, his research work, and I've seen some of what he's done in prep for today, and it's very good. Thank you. So anyway, I thought we'd start today by what I like to call exploring the obvious, perhaps. I think everyone thinks they know, if they know anything at all, about the split of the towns, and they're all going to tell you it's about schools. It's about all the sections of town building schools, and Center Abington blowing the budget right out of the water and pissing everyone else off to the point that they said, we're out of here. Is that an oversimplification?
That's about it.
I thought so. Anyway, so I put out this piece of yellow journalism to get everyone's attention. The Mansard abomination. What the hell was that? But anyhow, the old town of Abington had an enormous jump in population between 1850 and 1860. And we'll actually see that on a slide later, I think, in the presentation. And I think part of the response to that, being responsible and caring about the youth and the town development, is that they decided to build a schoolhouse. They had some schoolhouses. They decided to build new, bigger, better schoolhouses in each of the 4 parishes or wards of the town. And at the time, that would have been Center Abington, South Abington, East Abington, and North Abington. So the budget was
$12,000.
$12,000, okay. And generally we say they spent $12,000, not necessarily. They spent a little more, a little less, whatever. The Hastings School was Whitman, I think. South Abington is the fine establishment they did there. They moved this building, they eventually tore it down, but that was their $12,000 school, or close to it. Then we had this one in the East Ward of town. It was built right next to, on School Street ultimately, School Street School, where the GAR Hall in Rockland still stands, basically at their parking lot. This was their building. Now, combined the budget, I think, with North Abington, we never hear about the North Abington School because North Abington never said, we're out of here. They stuck it out with the old town. But this was their school, and Abington and, North Abington and Rockland combined.
They
and
built
it came
they built the schools at the same time, thus they
saved some money.
They look alike, and they saved a lot of money instead of $24,000.
Was it 20?
No, $12,000, $24,000 for the 2 schools.
I thought it was 20 for the 2 schools.
No, that's what they eventually paid.
Okay.
But I was saying it was
The
projected.
budget
for
would have been,
24.
yeah. So they came in under budget.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the Whitman School came in just over budget.
Yeah, but acceptable.
Yes.
But that was fine until Center Abington, just down the road here on Dunbar Street, where you see apartment buildings now, built this. A mansard school And it came in damn near $25,000, you know, and the other parts of town said, whoa, wait a minute, we're not paying that, you know, no, you had a budget, what the hell? And they actually refused to pay it. And the contractor, I believe, sued, won with legal fees and everything else, but it was enough for the south portion, the South Ward, the South Parish, and the East to say, we're done, we're out of here. And that's the gross oversimplification for how the town split apart. The mansard abomination being the straw that broke the camel's back. What we are here to talk about today is there were a lot of irons in the fire already that were establishing. We'll talk about Rockland today, we'll talk about Whitman next year when they broke away, that's their anniversary. But there was a lot of stuff that already was in place that contributed to the reason for and the ability to break apart. They had infrastructure, so it's something to talk about. Hatherley Grant, this is actually part of the Rockland Town Seal.
Yes.
We don't know what the middle means, do we?
No, we don't know.
I don't know, maybe someone else does, but that shield is very pretty, but what it means is maybe we just haven't discovered it yet. But the Hatherley Grants, and there were more than one, 1856, there were actually some earlier ones, I think, gave us the land that makes up the town of Rockland today, East Abington then. This is the Hatherley Grant here, and this blue outline here is the present day town of Rockland. Hatherley is most of it. So you can see why the importance of the Hatherley Grant to the town of Rockland. It was most of their land. Here we see it blown up here. French's River coming through, the Drinkwater River coming through, the present day line between Rockland, Hanover, and Hanson. Now, this is important because it was Drinkwater, wasn't it, that broke away? Hanover wanted to create their own town, and shortly after, Old Town of Abington was established in 1712. By 1727, the Old Town of Abington gave away this strip of land. We like to think that the Whitman and Rockland breakaways were the first defectors, if you will, from the Old Town of Abington. No. In order to have enough land to form a town of Hanover, they needed more land, and we gave it to them. So in the very, very early days of Abington, what was to the east of the present day of Rockland went away. But a lot of that was, again, Hatherley Grant. Hatherley is very important to the whole thing. All of these other little pieces here are all these other grants that made up the town. They came in later, and they followed to a great degree the Scituate Trail here that went from Weymouth down into the Bridgewaters. And most of the rest of the town formed on that.
It's okay if I say something about Drinkwater?
Please jump in anytime you would like.
This was the Drinkwater section of Hanover. We know it as Hanover down by, everybody remember Lufkin's Furniture, and then that way. But they really didn't know what they wanted to do. They only knew one thing: they didn't want to go with Abington. It was too far away.
It was.
So when they decided to throw their lot with Hanover.
The newly formed town,
Yes.
as it was forming, they saw an opportunity.
Yes.
And they took advantage of it. So
I think they actually wanted to go south, but they may not have wanted them there, so they went with
No, they didn't. No, they could go to Hanover. Anyway, so that was a first division, if you will. But looking at how a separate entity was formed, everything was based, and we learned this back in looking at the formation of the Old Town of Abington. In order to have a town in colonial days, you needed a map, you needed a learned minister. So in 1711, the Old Town of Abington, which included everything, got themselves a learned minister, built themselves a church, and founded a church in 1711, became the Old Town of Abington in 1712. 1807, actually before 1807, the South Ward decided they wanted their own church. They were too tired of traveling north. They spent half the day on the roads, and there were barely any roads there. So they broke away and created the second Congregational Church in what is now Whitman. A few years later, 1813, the East Ward decided we want to do that too. This was a big deal. They had to go to the state legislature and be chartered as a separate parish. Wow. I mean, talk about a provocative step and providing, we're talking about a major division from the old town as early as 1813. You know, it wasn't, they didn't wait till 1874. They started in 1813 by starting a new church. Now, what I love about this, and Van and I talked about it a little bit earlier, they put it in the middle of a field. There was nothing there. And this was actually a problem why the East Ward didn't develop quite as quickly as anyone else. They were over a natural barrier, which we'll see. They were set aside. The land didn't break up from the Hatherley Grant very easily, but they literally put it in the middle of a field. I have an 1880 history where they talk about that. But what was brilliant about it was, I love this slide. Can we have the lights off, Dan? That just threw my cameraman into a tizzy. But anyway, this is a current day aerial view looking from the south. This is Market Street here. This is Columbian Square up here. This is the center of what present day Rockland, and this is Union Street. They connected this old, basically, Indian trail all the way to the north to the Boxbury section of what would later become Rockland and what was Weymouth, where Center Abington and South Abington had the old Setauket Indian Trail. They didn't have that, so they built it. They built it. They put the church in the middle and they connected the roads and said, okay, here we have a center, we have a road, we have a way through, we have a connection to civilization. I want to give them an urban planning award. I mean, it was a brilliant move. Yes, sir.
Is that called Clark Field?
Called what?
That's Hanover.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for knowing that.
Okay.
I didn't have a
That's
clue.
off Circuit Street.
Okay. So that'd be further over here. But anyway, and I think, Van, you wanted to make note of that landmass.
This is like a natural barrier, Rockland on the side. Rockland was considering themselves not part of Abington because they couldn't see it.
They couldn't
deal
get there.
with it. And this kind of separated the towns, you know, and there was nothing here. This, a lot of people today call this Thompson's Pond. Thompson's Pond was over here. And the reason Thompson's Pond is gone because this is the runway to the base. They
It's
built
in the way.
They built up the runway. I had a guy come up to me and he said for 20 years he studied Thompson's Pond.
And it wasn't Thompson's Pond.
It wasn't Thompson's Pond, though. No. But then you had the part where the golf course is and stuff, and Rockland felt like they were by themselves.
Well, they were.
It gets a lot deeper after that.
They were.
The reason in 1726, when Rockland was turned down for the church, was they considered Rockland poor. They figured they didn't have enough money to hire the minister.
Surprise.
Come in and stuff like that.
Well, then it had to build a road. And they went to the town and said, we want to build a road. And the town said, well, good luck with that. But they ultimately, and I have a section here, I think I can quote exactly, there was a wonderful history written about it. And I probably don't have enough light to do it. But ultimately, the county got involved. And they built not just Union Street, they built Webster Street, and they built North Ave. So giving them an east-west connection, giving them a north-south connection, all centered around the first church. This was a really good move on their part. I think the parish meaning this part of town, paid for half of it, and the town, I think, paid for the other half. So it got split up, but it got done. And it was such an important move and so successful. I believe this is the 1839 map. Again, I've outlined in blue current day property lines, if you will, town lines. But here we have Union Street again. Look at all of this construction all around Union Street. And industry started here because the first shoe production, and of course Abington's known for its shoes, started up in the Boxbury section. It was the first, and I'm forgetting the name. Do you remember who it was?
Oh, I think it was a Hunt.
It was a Hunt, and I'm told actually they're buried in the cemetery in South Weymouth.
I feel like Abington for 500.
I'll give you 1,000 for that one. But anyway, so their gamble worked. I mean, they had a north-south connection, they had an east-west connection, they had a church, all this infrastructure they were gathering, and they made money, didn't they? So I mean, they were successful at it, but the growth was a problem. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the schools that, and I'll explain why I'm showing this slide in a minute, and I'm going to see if anyone knows where it is, but the town grew so much that even having town meetings became very cumbersome. They used the town house as their town hall, and votes got so contentious or difficult, they would have to go outside to the railroad tracks, and the yeses would be on one side of the railroad tracks, and the noes would be on the other side of the railroad tracks. That's how cumbersome town meetings got. So the growth was a blessing, the growth was a curse. I think the growth had a lot to do with the shoe industry.
This, I just want to say that at one point when they were trying to separate from the schools, they had 2,400 people
Trying
to
to
get in
here.
there to vote at a town meeting.
Couldn't do it.
But
Does anyone know what this is? You're supposed to know.
I know where it is.
In the back.
Central Street.
This is Central Street here. This was later called Lyceum Hall, and St. Bridget's Church got it. So they had it. This little building, I think, is still out there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but what confuses people about this is before Central Street was dropped to do the railroad bridge. They got rid of the railroad, the grade railroad crossing next to St. Bridget's Church, and put St. Bridget's up on a hill. It never used to be. It used to be flat. But the hall here became a bone of contention. It was a good location in terms of geographically from all parts of town. And Central Street, it wasn't far off. It was near Island Grove. And again, the railroad went right next to it. So, I mean, there was a lot to say about why this was here. But this was a symptom of the growth. The growth is success, the growth is a problem. And that manifested itself in many ways. This is a lead into something that Van is going to jump in and talk at much more length than I can. But I like these numbers in that, of course, Rockland and Whitman didn't exist before the 1870s, but from 1860 to 1870, we had what growth? No, 1850, here we go. 62% growth from 1850 to 1860. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. And again, I suspect it was the shoe business. 1870 was the last time we were one town. But look what happened by 1880, a few years after the split. Of course, no surprise, the old town dropped in population 60%. But 36, maybe 3,700 people. Rockland had 4,500 people. My goodness. They were bigger than the old town. And the old town included Abington and North Abington. Whitman had broken away. We'll talk about that next year. But this is really significant to see, that after the break, that poor town of Rockland that didn't have the money to build a church or split actually walked away with a prize.
Rockland was paying 40% of the budget was coming from Rockland.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously,
And as the citizens back then said, and we're getting nothing.
getting nothing for it, getting kicked. Yes, cultural council.
Where did people come from to, like, before they moved to Abington? What was the natural?
That's a really great question. I love it because I love answering it. The Abington-Weymouth line is actually the line between Plymouth County and Plymouth Colony, Plymouth Bay Colony, and Massachusetts Bay Colony. It's now also the county line. But back then, it was the two different colonies that came together on that line. And although Abington was considered the northern fringes of the Bridgewaters, most of our population came down over the line from Weymouth.
Okay.
In fact, the first mill built at Island Grove was Jacob Nash's. Jacob Nash never lived in this town. He built a mill at Island Grove. He did the first church by conscription and never lived here. He was a good real estate investor. And we see that here. Again, the reason to extend Union Street down from the Boxbury section through your neighborhood was to connect to that population and encourage that to come down. And it worked. It absolutely worked.
Once the factory started, there was a lot of work around here. The Irish came in and worked in the factories.
And a lot of that was because of the railroads coming in
And
the
they were-
1830s.
I think the Italians were coming in. The Italians were putting the water lines in, stuff like that.
The slave labor of the time, pretty much. Yeah, it was kind of amazing. Anyway, it all built up, obviously, and it built up to the point where they went to the legislature to say, make us separate. And Van, this is some material you pulled together, and I love it. It's very comprehensive. Do you want to kind of guide us through some of this?
Oops, I can't see it. I can tell you the 40%. What angered the Rockland people was they asked for roads, and they asked for them to be paved and stuff, and they were told no. And then with all that building going up on Union Street, they were all wood buildings, they were afraid of fire. And they asked for fire protection from the town of Abington. Again, they were told no, that's all, you're on your own, you know. So they were paying the bills, and they really, like I showed you with that berm that was there, they really didn't even see Abington, you know. There was no need to come over here. And with the schools building and things like that, the per capita was outrageous. It was like $494 for the people that lived in Abington. It was $434 in Rockland, and at that time that was big money. You know? And then the Abington people who were taking advantage of that were saying, "You're just crying poor mouths," you know, stuff like that. But they were.
But it was real.
Doing that.
It was real. This is actually, I think, was a kind of a sales brochure, if you will. Statistical information. The proposed town would be larger in area than 54 of the towns in the Commonwealth.
The top figure is Abington as it was, for
Yeah.
all four towns.
Of
together.
the whole town, right.
And the second figure underneath
proposed.
it is Rockland.
Right.
And the lawyer used this to, on his case to get out of him.
Pleading the case to the
Yeah.
legislature in Boston, saying,
And
let this happen.
The first time that they went, Whitman went with them. But Whitman was trying to get a section of Hanson to go with them. Auburndale, I think,
I
Auburndale.
think it was Bridgewater, but yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
Out of Bridgewater,
Yeah,
you're right with
yeah.
the Bridgewater thing.
Yeah.
And it took them a while to do this. And when they first filed to go in, they went in with Whitman,
Whitman and Rockland together.
and they were turned down. So the next time that they were getting ready to go, I have the report here, the defense of it, they wanted Whitman out of the picture. So they asked Whitman to stay away, and we'll go do it, and then we'll help you.
We'll show you how it's done.
And it worked the second time. But the first time they turned them down flat. But between 1800 and 1874, there were 70 towns made in Massachusetts.
Right.
So it was not uncommon for this to happen. And one of the same lawyer that defended Rockland defended Holbrook. And he commented that Rockland had a better case than Holbrook, and Holbrook had already won their case. But those are the numbers that are under there.
Yeah, valuation, for instance, of the whole town, the proposed town would have a greater valuation than 254 of the towns of the Commonwealth. They were sitting pretty. They had some money. That's kind of nice.
And another
Population-
case that Rockland had was they had 900 and something votes, and there were 1,400 votes around in Abington with Whitman going with them. They would lose every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question.
Yes.
It doesn't say Rockland on that slide, but when did the name Rockland come about?
Well, it's interesting. I think it said both on that slide, which I found a little confusing. On behalf of the petitioners for an act to incorporate that part of Abington called East Abington as a new town called Rockland.
I didn't know it was doing an eye test, I'm sorry.
Quite all right.
That-
That's what I'm here for.
The name happened right away. There was a vote in Rockland, and I think Hatherley was the
they actually
When it was there.
considered changing it further down the
because
road to
because
Haverly.
they were confusing it with Rockland, Maine. The
Yeah.
post office was having all kinds of trouble with it. But as soon as this was passed, Rockland went right into it.
Oh, absolutely.
Excuse me, I have another question.
Yes. Shall I go back, or are we
Do you have
good?
the name of the lawyer who was?
Yes, I do, it's right here. He, unfortunately, he was a
It's
very
Ellis.
good lawyer. He died at the age of 33.
That would have been Ellis Morton, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Ellis. And we'll see his name again. There's a wonderful note he sent afterwards.
He was
to
a
the
good
Ham.
defense lawyer. He took some liberties. I was telling
Of
Doug
course.
earlier that there were 170 houses on Union Street in Rockland. And Abington was saying, well, we're going to build out North Ave, a lot of land
So
there.
you
and
don't need to
everything.
be separate. We're going to connect you
And
better.
he said that there were only 5 houses on North Ave.
Right, a lie.
And if you look at the 1881 map, it's loaded with houses.
And they mention here roads, mild of roads situation, and they mention here the Hanover Branch Railroad. Now that was something that started around the Civil War, got interrupted and got finished afterwards. It's now, by the way, the Hanover Branch Rail Trail that starts up in North Abington Center, and recently Hanover has completed part of their end of the rail trail. I think they hope to do the whole thing eventually. But again, this was a piece of sales literature about, listen, we're big enough to be a town, we're rich enough to be a town, we're bigger than the old town in this manner, in this manner, in this manner. We've got the schools. East Abington compared with other new towns. Of 70 towns incorporated since 1800, 66 were less in population than the proposed town, 44 were less in valuation than the proposed town, and 21 were less in area than the proposed town. So they're hitting all the bullet points. I think he did this brilliantly. And it worked, more importantly. And we also wanted to talk, this is a slide that Van came up with for E.R. Studley. There were people involved in this. We just mentioned, obviously, the attorney who was handling it for the future town of Rockland. But Studley was an interesting character before and after. We're going to talk about him more next month, but he's worth an introduction now. Do you want to explain why he's important? Because he is.
He held a lot of offices in Rockland. He's the one that,
Eventually.
when there was trouble, when the towns were splitting up and they had to divide the money and stuff like that, he's the one that stepped in, and he was the calming force with it. He soothed everybody.
After the act was done. But leading up to it, he was very diplomatic. I mean, he supported the new town and was very active in the ward of the old town, the east ward of the old town. I think he was originally from Hanover or
Yes,
something.
he was,
Yeah.
yeah.
So he wasn't even from Rockland or Abington.
He is the first person in Rockland that sold land to the Irish. And
How
the
dare
land
he.
was up by the, where the bowling alley is now? Those streets, Grove Street and a couple of the other ones, he bought it off somebody that was a racist, and he turned around and he sold it to the Irish.
Very clever man, he really was. But he's often referred to as the father of Rockland. And some of what he did leading up to it, and a lot of what he did after it became a town to, again, make it a reality. So he figures more into my discussions of building a new town.
He was a town official until 1916 when he died.
Yeah, he really was. He deserved the title, Father of Rockland. I love this note. It came up. I have to thank Eileen for a lot of the research she supplied me with. I have folders of it over here. But in it, and also in the display case in the room across the hall from us, Dear Mr. Lane, when you go home tonight, you will be in Rockland. The bill is signed by the attorney. And again, he died in September, I think September 26th. So this probably was one of his last great acts that he did in terms of getting Rockland through the legislature as a new town. An amazing effort. But again, I hope that what you're seeing through what we presented today is it was about so much more than a school. It really was. And the seeds had been planted way back. I mean, right down to the original land grant, which gave them their own exclusive set-aside part of the town, literally off of the beaten path, because the Setauket Trail was over on to the west, heading through North Abington heading through Abington Center, heading through Whitman. They didn't have that to the east, but they created it.
Oops, sorry.
Go.
As far back as 1805, they had decided that the town was too big.
Yeah.
They had to separate in some way.
And of course the town said, no way.
No,
No way.
Because they knew where the money was.
Yes.
I've come across the name Lane in just some,
Lane's Corner.
or the person.
Yes.
Who is he again? Is it like, why is the,
I'm not sure if he was in Shoe, but if you know the old Rockland Plaza, that's Lane's Corner
okay.
there, and there was a factory there.
He was
So
obviously,
Mr. Lane was a.
he was one of the supporters of
There were
the
a lot of
breakaway.
lanes in Rockland.
Zenas Lane lived right above. He was in the French mansard, the second inn.
And I was going to say the house on Liberty Street near the Sunoco station, that was a Lane house.
Okay.
You're
Yes, sir.
talking about the land grants.
Yeah.
Will you explain what a land grant is and why that was important?
Land grant was basically a payment for services or whatever, where instead of giving you money, they'd give you land in the New World. And they'd give you a large parcel of land in the New World.
All right, so that was by the British government, a land grant to him, and that was his land.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
I just didn't quite understand
Sorry.
how land
Sorry.
grant fit in.
it was the original owners of the land, and oftentimes they did have to clear it with the Indians. And did. I mean, we see actually the Hatherley grant coming up a couple of times, because getting it from the Brits was one thing, getting it from the people who were using it was something entirely different. So there was a process for all of it. Some of it was hard, some of it was easy.
So it was
And-
something like squatters already in
Hi,
the...
well, they weren't squatters, they
they
were
actually bought it
moved
from
in.
Aborigines.
Unoccupied land.
yeah.
They actually bought it from the Indians. They have deeds and stuff. I'm
Oh,
sure
okay.
they weren't fair to the Indians, but they were. That's where they got it. Chickatawbuck is a name. You know the road near Blue Hill. That was the one of the chiefs around here. He's on a lot of the deeds. Actually, there were two Chickatawbucks.
And we'll take this opportunity to say there really were no Indian settlements in the old town of Abington. It was a pass-through. They might have done some fishing here or whatever, but they didn't stay here. And also, I think I can make this statement with great accuracy, all of the ponds in Abington, Rockland, and Whitman are all man-made. They're all mill ponds. So there were streams throughout the entire area. There were swampy areas and lowlands and green pastures and meadows, but there were no ponds until we needed hydropower, not hydroelectric, hydropower to run mills. Reed's Pond, Island Grove Pond is actually Jacob Nash's mill pond. All of them were streams that got dammed up. So they didn't stay here.
So they were
passed
still
through.
using the trails, probably?
Well, they definitely use the trails.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at the layout of Market Street or something. I mean, what is that? I mean,
Yeah.
it's nothing straight. The straight roads, those we built. Again, Union Street, straight line. North Ave, straight line. Another thing, in case you're not aware of the big picture, Old Abington never had a main street. Washington Street was close, but we have a North Ave, a Center Ave right outside our door, and a South Ave. South Ave ended up in Whitman. Center Ave goes between Center Abington and now Rockland, and North Ave goes between North Abington and Rockland. I grew up in this town, and it took me the longest time to figure out South Ave? North Ave? But when you think about it in terms of the scheme of the big town, the old town, it made perfect sense. It was 3 crosses to the trail that were pretty straight lines when you think about it, and they divided the town up horizontally, if you will, from east to west, and that's what gave us that, and why we have no main street.
Has Union Street always ended where it ends?
Yeah, Market Street on one end, yes, that was laid out to end at Market Street. But the other end, there was already something there in your neighborhood. Was it Union Street from the start?
All the way down, I think it was.
I think it was too. I think it started in Wayman.
Liberty Street came into Union.
So it's always ended like where Union Point is
Yes.
now?
Yeah.
Well, no, it went right through to Columbia Square.
Right through the base. It's still Union Street over in South Wayman.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a political football now. There are people, historians probably like myself, who would love to reconnect it, but no one on North Union Street wants it because
I
they
live
don't
there.
want to be on a main road. But at the same time, the people who did their blood, sweat, and tears to get that road in, I'm sure, are rolling over in their graves because they dedicated so much of their lives to getting Union Street in and making themselves a town. Union Street, I dare say, made the town of Rockland. I really think that's a fair statement.
Off the town, Hannah.
And if you look out at the base, the Rockland line goes right up to that fence.
Right up to the chain link.
It starts there.
Yeah. And of course they put a circle there. Yes, Mr. Baker.
Actually, that circle you're just mentioning, they have outlets to both Rockland and Wayne.
Yes, they do.
You can stand in that. You can stand in
Yeah,
that
what do you think?
circle.
What do you think they're going to do?
Rockland.
Yeah.
Well, the intention was clear, but obviously they needed the permission of the surrounding communities to do it, and they didn't get it. So there it sits.
Yep.
But it's potential.
Yeah, well, like
Yeah,
you
that's
said,
great.
people on North Union Street don't want it. People on Union Street, Weymouth don't want it.
Well, people like their dead ends.
Yeah.
But that's a relatively modern concept, At the time, I think when it was built, I read that some houses were moved closer to the road. They wanted to be closer to that main means of communication. So
A lot of people wanted the road to go underground as a tunnel. and the contractor for the Navy said, I build roads, I don't build tunnels.
tunnels. I have contractors who build tunnels. Maybe we can do this still. Yes.
You mentioned a trail earlier. So is it
Setauket.
Setauket? What is that now?
It's an old Indian trail, and it connected, was it Great Pond, I think?
Yeah.
Down to Robbins Pond.
I'm aging myself, but it went by the drive-in right
By the drive, like Adam Street
50.
in Abington, onto Washington Street, and pretty much following Washington Street much of the way down.
Does it still exist?
It does, as those streets.
Oh,
And
that's-
indeed, one of the earliest political boundaries in Massachusetts, in the New World, frankly, was at the Setauket Trail, where it crossed over from the Massachusetts Bay Colony to the Plymouth Bay Colony. And there is a marker out there on the town line, etched into a piece of stone called the Heap of Stones. The Heap of Stones was, again, like the earliest political division in the entire country is on Adam Street at the Heap of Stones. It's not the original Heap of Stones. They put one back.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it's there. And I know the Garden Club has been maintaining it, and they're hoping to have, I think we will, the letters into the stone like painted so you can actually read it. But it's a very, very important boundary that we all just drive by. We do, but it's there.
That was my next question I was going to ask.
Yes, ma'am.
When did the Indians stop using that path, but near that heap of stone? Did the people stop them, or did what did the Indians
They had wars.
They kind of went away.
Wiped them out.
Yeah.
Because that Chickatawbuck died of smallpox, and smallpox probably came over on the ships.
do? Yeah,
They had the King Philip War.
right.
King Philip was, I guess he was down in Rockland near the KSC. There's a cemetery down there. There was a little camp that they just find little arrowheads and things like that. But they, like Doug said, they didn't stay around here.
No.
They just passed
Oh,
through.
that's too bad.
Well, I mean, we don't talk about it much, but when the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, there was civilization there already that had been wiped out. But I mean, there were constructs in Plymouth already, ready-made for them, because the Indian tribe that had made it died and went away. So they didn't have it quite as rough as we've been led to believe in our history classes.
Chickatawbuck was good to the white people that came in.
Yeah.
But he was a vicious warrior to them, fighting his...
Fighting off everyone else.
And that was the end of him. Then one day, him and his lieutenants were up there and they were wiped out.
It was interesting coming into a new world and settling all of this stuff. But anyway, I'm going to ask for questions in a minute for anything we haven't covered, but advertising part B of all of this, and there's some postcards on the table for this already. Building the New Town, we'll be talking about that on April 7th here at 2 o'clock, and the guest conversationalist is Donald Cann, who is very knowledgeable about all things Rockland, and he and John Galuzzo have actually put out a few books and picture books about various towns, so we look forward to that. Also, there are some other anniversary events happening. I loved it when I read this. Thursday of this week at 11 to 1 at Rockland Town Hall. They're celebrating with a cake from Montelios. It's going to be good. and they invite the general public to join them. And the cake is generously donated by Montilio's Bakery. So if you're around on Thursday, don't miss that. Pre-cake, come on, you gotta go. But that is actually the anniversary date. So it's an important date on the calendar.
March 9th is.
I'm sorry?
March 9th is
I'm sorry, you're right. Why are they doing it on the 7th?
because
You would know.
more people.
On Thursday?
It's a Sunday, right?
Well, it's a town hall.
This is Thursday. The 9th
Yeah.
would therefore be a
That's what the party
Saturday.
is, but, well,
It doesn't make sense.
it's.
We won't ask the intricacies of government. Saturday would have been better.
Could I add a few things
Go,
down on the
please.
school? Rockland was the force. I mean, when that school bill came in, there were 45 cents left in the account. And they tried to sneak the bill in. The guy that was the treasurer put it in. When the town report came out, there was just one little thing on it that they wanted to approve and pay the extra $16,000. Rockland went through the roof when they heard that. And
Politics, here we go again.
politics, and something that happens nowadays. Today is the Abington standard at the time. They didn't have anything in there. The people had to go by the Bridgewater newspaper,
That
which was
reported it.
Brockton now. And they had the accounts of the meetings in there and telling people what was going on and all this stuff. But Rockland really had a fit there. That's where the Zeke came in. I can't think of his last name. But
Mr. Studley?
Studley. And he calmed everything down. So they voted finally to pay the bill. Rockland's share of that bill was almost $10,000. And they paid it. And they paid it to get away from Abington. That was part of the deal.
The ransom. They paid the ransom. Anyway, and another thing that's happening, and Pam Ryan, who's sitting in the back there, gathered this, and I think you helped, the Art in the Rotunda exhibit at the Rockland Public Library, a glimpse at what things looked like 150 years ago. Pam, how long is the exhibit up? Do we know?
For the month of March.
For the month of March. So get there this month and see it. The old pictures are amazing. I expect in April we'll probably be featuring some of the same as we talk about the actual
I was going to say with
building.
Pam, I didn't help her with that, and Pam doesn't need any help.
I thought she said you did. I'm sorry. I'm giving credit.
Pam does a
She
great
did it.
job for the
I
Rockland.
knew she could, but I swear she gave you credit when we talked earlier.
She did help me with pushing.
Pam has saved
Okay,
the...
see, he did help. It's who's more modest here. We have a battle going, but okay.
Abington played a big part in the Civil War, and Pam saved a lot of the pictures, a lot of the
Oh,
history.
yeah.
They identified some of the people that were in the pictures that the Civil War. Rockland took a real beating. Rockland Abington took a real
Right.
beating in the Civil War.
We'll talk about that next time too. It's a fun, quick story. I had a contact from someone on the national level who was wondering where the Civil War cannons that were sent by the federal government to Abington went.
I thought they were downstairs.
No,
There aren't any. Abington doesn't
the GAI.
have them. Rockland got them, and they originally went to the cemetery.
Yeah, there's 4 of them, 2 of them in Mount Pleasant.
And when they built the GAR Hall, they moved from Mount Pleasant to the GAR Hall. But of course, I don't think Rockland could apply to the federal government for cannons for their soldiers fighting in the Civil War, because Rockland didn't exist during the Civil War. So I believe
It might have been through the GAI, which was probably in 1868.
apparently at the time Rockland didn't exist, so they had to requisition them under the name of Abington, but Abington never got them. So I had to explain this to this federal researcher that didn't work that way.
They didn't apply for the cannons until 1900.
Okay, so another reason why Rockland.
They got wind of that. Hey, if you have a military hall or memorial, that anyone can apply for surplus.
Yep.
So one of the members was appointed, wrote a letter, and that's how they got them. They just had to pay the shipping. So any military installation would get them.
Cool.
And that's how they got there.
Perfect. Well, I'm glad they're there. I went to kindergarten in that building, so I have fond memories of them going way back. Not quite 1900, but way back. And anyway, but it's another story about how the division wasn't maybe as clear cut as we always think it was. There was a little back and forth that went on a long time after that.
That hall was built by women. Women paid for
The money, yeah.
the money that
The
went
most
through.
amazing stained glass.
There's a small
and stuff.
band of people that are still there that have saved that building.
Yeah, oh, I
It's
agree.
a treasure. Just one more comment on the schools. Rockland also paid for the markers. The town markers, there's one by the VFW.
Oh, the
old
granite
VFW.
boundaries.
Granite one, there's one on the base.
Right.
That the DPW guy in Rockland, Tom Murrow, used to tell me that they used to hang them down in one of the holes to make sure the thing, because they have to check those markers every so often to make sure they're
I
still
think the
there.
selectman is supposed to walk the boundaries. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, question in the back.
Yeah, is it true that in order for
Jim
the
Paul.
town to incorporate, they also needed a poorhouse, which is
Well, they had one.
Mom's house?
That's under Donald's talk.
Yeah.
It's Don's talk.
Okay. Yeah, that's something we'll be talking about in terms of building the new town. So make sure you come back next month.
good.
I think it
Okay.
is because the Abington actually pulled back on their alms house. Oh, you know,
They ended up, they said there was no one in it. We're closing
everybody
it.
was coming here. That's
We don't want it anymore. An old refugee story, huh? Anyway, any other questions before I release you for refreshments? Yes, ma'am?
Yes, I have a question about why the center school was so expensive. Why was it twice what the other schools cost?
I don't know if we ever had a clear answer.
Probably because the committee was from right around there. There was a guy that lived right in back of it. The committee to build that school was from that district. So there were no Rockland people on it or anything. And they valued education over the tax thing. It was almost a scandal. You know, there was the town clerk for Abington was also the principal in that school. And he thought, you know, education came first.
Which it kind of did, but not at twice the price. So there were talk of scandals. I don't know that I saw any specific names of being on the take or whatever. And ultimately, the builder had to submit the bills in the lawsuits that he won to justify why he earned his money. So I think he made his money, but I think they got a Cadillac of a school when everyone else got a Chevy. Dare I say that?
I think Rockland was just happy let's get
They were
out
happy to be
let's
gone.
get out of here.
Yes.
Well,
Jeff.
I suppose one question would be, what would the economic impact of the panic of 1873 have had on the building of the Dunbar School versus the three earlier schools?
I thought that too, but it was too late.
Okay.
The Panic of '73,
So what time was when was the Dunbar completed?
72.
2, 3?
No, 71 or 2.
72, okay.
I thought it was a little bit later, but the panic hadn't hit yet.
Okay.
Abington, the center, did suffer through that panic.
Quite a bit.
And they didn't call it a panic, they called it a depression back then.
Yeah. We snuck it in as a line. He probably didn't get paid till then because it had to work its way through the courts. But in terms of the school construction, it was pretty much done by that time.
Are you Jeff?
Yes.
Yes,
You asked the question, he's the guy we were talking about? There was a guy on the committee, you were looking for personalities. There was a guy on the committee named Clapp from Rockland. And he was a target that a lot of people made, and they made fun of his name, they made fun of everything, you know, about him. But he was one of the people you might be looking for. Doug gave me a biography,
blurb, yeah.
a little blurb on him. I couldn't find him. But I have seen the references to him. And they did not like him at all. And he was a stockbroker. So he had investments and stuff around.
I think they called him Boss Clap, didn't
Yeah,
they? Yeah.
something like
So he was the target of a lot of anti-breakaway people, and obviously someone who was happy when it happened.
And I think he had like $30,000 in 1870, and he was 29 years old, and he was going for the gold.
Or trying to. Yes.
Was the main industry in Rockland around 1874, was it the shoes at
Yeah.
that point too? Okay.
Absolutely. In fact, we had numbers of how many shoe factories there were at the breakup. Danny, could I have the lights on again? I've got the number here somewhere. Here we are.
Pam, is that true? Is that true? The shoe workers were the majority?
For what?
The shoe workers were the majority at that time?
Yes.
Or was
Here
it
we are.
agricultural?
Based upon the research of the late Martha Campbell, 33 of Old Abington's 82 shoe factories were in the East Ward, and this was a statement made in 1863. So obviously it was a big deal. Whitman's were more diversified. Again, we'll talk about that more next year, but tack factories and box factories, and they had other industries other than shoes, but basically Abington, North Abington, were the shoe heads for the whole thing. And it started in Rockland. It did, up in the north section, up in the Boxbury section. That the first shoe manufacturing was happening. There's a lot written about it. The late historian Martha Campbell has extensive writing. She had a regular column in the Rockland Standard called The Research Reporter, I think that was the name of it. Anyway, and brilliant work. I knew her personally, and she was quite wonderful. A Southern lady, actually. She didn't like to talk on radio because she said no Yankee wants to be told their history by a Southern lady. But and she was probably right.
I think Kay Gilbride wrote her college thesis on the Rockland shoe industry. They must have it here somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure we do. Anyway, there's time for more personal questions afterwards. We will host a small collation in the back room. There's coffee, there's hot water for tea and hot cocoa and whatever. So stick around, enjoy some food. Please enjoy some food, otherwise we'd have to eat it all. And talk amongst yourselves. Van will be here to answer more questions if you'd like. I will be here as well. We invite you to join us again next month for part B of this story as we discover, okay, now you got a town, now what do you do? And they figured it out, which was nice, and the way they figured it out was sometimes quite brilliant, but certainly quite successful, so that's kind of a nice thing. So that, and I always end by the same thing. How many here are members of the Historical Society of Old Abington? Raise your hands, look around, and if you see someone who doesn't raise their hand, say hi to them, please, and make them feel at home. So I invite you all to join us in the back room. Thank you for coming.